Just heard in Britain's Les Illuminations, and following this intermission will also be heard in Karajan's songs as part of the incidental music to Beethoven's Egmont. Actually, it's Goethe's Egmont. It's Beethoven's music. Miss Hendricks last appeared with the Minnesota Orchestra in April of 1978, and at that time she was fulfilling the composer's notation of amplified soprano piece, and she was appearing in David Del Tredici's Final Alice. And many people who heard her and who heard that concert will really never forget it in some way. In fact, Miss Hendricks has been very strongly identified with that piece, but as we have already heard and will hear on this program, she's quite a versatile artist and sings a good many other parts of the repertoire as well. In addition to orchestral appearances, she's going to be making her debut with the Paris Opera next year as Zerlina in Mozart's Don Giovanni, and opera and recital make up part of her active life. Miss Hendricks, you're a resident of France, and so this is a trip across the ocean for you to appear with the Minnesota Orchestra this week.
Yes, it is.
Now, Final Alice is something that people just, artist association, I guess, people say Final Alice, Barbara Hendricks. Did you find that the strong identification of you with that work was good for your career, or did it in some ways typecast you in a way that you found it difficult to shake off?
Well, I don't think I did it enough times to typecast me. I did perform it with I think about 7 orchestras here in America, and the identification that I have with the piece is one that I think may have enhanced me, because I was able to do something that is very seldom done by a soprano in my repertoire, which was to sing such a tour de force of such length and such breadth, and also to do the narration at the same time, which means that the acting and the singing going hand in hand, which one hopes does anyway when one sings, but then to have to use a speaking voice as well. So if anything, I think it may have showed that I have certain more qualities than just being a singer, a throat, you know.
Just shouting on pitch, as
right.
One person referred to it.
Yeah.
So, and actually, there was some shouting in that score, as I remember.
On pitch, even.
Right. When you were using a bullhorn in certain sections, and of course, it's a very different use of the voice, and he calls for amplified soprano in most of these Alice pieces, some of which have occurred before and some after Final Alice. Do you still find yourself invited to perform this work, or have you moved beyond it now?
Well, I still get an occasional invitation. I am trying to I would like to do it once in England, because I think that the English would really get a kick out of the piece. But other than that, the piece is basically retired for me. But I have been, before I did Alice, I had already sung with most of the major orchestras, doing other repertoire, and also had done quite a lot of recitals, which I think in this country I'm probably, particularly in New York, am mostly known for is my recital work.
And you'll be performing with the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center.
Yes, in January.
In Tully Hall. And vocal chamber music is a wholly different part of the repertoire, and one not particularly well known. Les Illuminations borders on chamber music, certainly in its textures, if not in its specifications. These poems, of course, many people associate them with a particular tenor voice. The settings of these poems, I should say, and that voice, of course, is Sir Peter Pears.
Yes.
You find that as a soprano that the tessitura is at all in need of adjustment for you?
No, as a matter of fact, the piece was written for soprano. I myself thought at first that it had been written for Peter Pears, because Benjamin Britten wrote so much of his music for Peter Pears. There are several songs dedicated to Peter Pears, but the piece was originally written for Sophie Weiss, a soprano. A light lyric, and as Neville Mariner has told me, a voice lighter than my own. There are, of course, places where a man's voice can be a little stronger. I mean, there's one place where I have to sing a low G, but I don't think the composer really means that it's necessary to have the sound of, say, a contralto or a mezzo in those notes, and it's really to have more of a parlando sound. I have heard the piece sung by tenor, and it is very different. but I don't find that it is in any way restrictive to me for my voice. I find that some of the higher things that a soprano voice can do with a lot more ease than a tenor voice.
The poetry of Rimbaud is not intended to be straightforward or didactic or even full of what we conventionally think of as meaning. Meanings are of an entirely different sort. We've already listened to you sing these 9 songs, but tell us, just in case our perception agrees with your own estimation, which ones are particular favorites of yours?
Well, I happen to like very much the second one. Now I'll have to remember.
Second one, oh yes, Towns.
Yes, I like that very much. Vocally, it's a very beautiful piece and quite. It's what he's. I think that he's really. Rimbaud was trying to say something about this Flemish town. Mm-hmm. And the way he describes it shows his certain attachment and love to it. And then there is Being Beauteous, which is absolutely fantastic piece, and one of the pieces I find the most difficult because after the beginning where I sing so softly and lyrically, sort of almost Debussy kind of lines, and then I have these leaps of sevenths. And I found it, when I learned the piece, rather incongruous to throw that in. But as I've rehearsed it, this is the first time I performed this piece with the orchestra. It all fell into place, and I saw exactly how Britten, how he meant it, and how it works really beautifully. I like that piece, and I also like Départ, which is the last song, very, very much. Yes.
You're going to be performing in the Mozart C minor Mass with Herbert von Karajan in Berlin, and will also be recording that work as well. And you've worked with von Karajan several times over the past few years, haven't you?
Yes, I did I did the Beethoven Ninth with him on the tour in Japan 2 years ago, and I've also done recordings. We're starting out with small parts, The Voice of Heaven and Don Carlos. I just did the first Blumenmädchen in Salzburg with him and the recording of that, and now I'm doing the C minor Mass with him, which is a project that we have had together for years. And it somehow got postponed or put off, or the mezzo wasn't the person he wanted, and so finally he still has his health, and I'm crossing my fingers that it will come off.
What's he like to work with, particularly in a recording situation? He's often described as a perfectionist.
Oh, he is definitely a perfectionist. I find as a singer that. I find that singers feel more in common with him than instrumentalists, from talking with other instrumentalists and some members of the orchestra. But if he's a man who loves the voice, and if he loves your voice, you can sing like you never believed you could when he's conducting.
What is it? Is it the kind of support that he gives technically, or is it some emotional support that's in spite of the...
Both. It's not something I can really define. I just remember that when I was rehearsing The Voice of Heaven, it's long lyrical lines in pianissimo, and I was worried about having enough breath for the long lines. And there was one point in the rehearsal, and he said, take your time, breathe, take the breath. And I tell you, on the recording, I had plenty of time for the breath. I took the breath, he was there for me, and it does not sound as if I did anything but a split second of breath. It was just, because he breathed, the orchestra, everything breathed so much with me, that in that split second, I had the support to do the line without any fear that there wouldn't be enough to finish it.
Now, you mentioned that this performance of Les Illuminations is the first time that you have performed this music with orchestra.
Yes.
And are the Klärchen songs from the Egmont incidental music also new to you as well?
Also new, and also the first time I've even heard of the rest of the music, because we often only hear the overture.
What was it like for you to discover these pieces? They will be a discovery for many people in the audience as well.
I enjoy them very much, and particularly with the use of the narrator. Which brings the story of life, because this is what this music was composed for a play. And since we won't have the play going on in between the music, the narrator serves the purpose of letting the audience know for what reason the music has been written, because the music really doesn't stand without that. And it keeps that thread going through of what's happening and how the music supports what's happening in the play. And I'm enjoying it very much, and I think that the audience will also enjoy to hear this music, which is not very often heard. And I think maybe only through recordings that most music lovers have even heard the entire music.
And there wasn't even a complete recording available until relatively recently.
Yes.
Before you make your debut with the Paris Opera as Zerlina, you're going to be singing a recital there. And what is been your experience? That do you do a lot of recital work in Europe, particularly in France, or do you just use France as a home base to move out in other places?
Well, a little bit of both, because I try to keep my private life a little bit separate from my professional life. But as it has happened, I do sing quite a lot in France, and I sing a lot of recitals. Recitals was my first love. I started out as a student of Jenny Turrell, and not only did I develop this love for doing recitals, but with someone like her, I also developed a great respect for the medium, and I realized how much there is to learn and how much I can grow as a performer by doing recitals and doing this repertoire. It helps me even as an actress on the opera stage, because if I can project the feeling in 2.5 minutes in a Schubert song and really start it from beginning to end and continue it so that the audience feels exactly what is happening, then it is that much easier, really, for me to take a character of 2.5 hours or 3 hours and develop it. It may be even a little bit more work because there's more time to do it, but still the idea of having to do it in 2.5 minutes has been a great discipline for me.
Was it when you studied with Jenny Turrell that you discovered the Russian song repertoire?
Oh, yes. I sing quite a lot of Russian music with her, and I discovered the French with her. It was the first language I sang in, very badly, I must say, at the beginning. But I discovered French music through her and Russian music, and she taught me the Russian herself, word for word.
And she was one of the best-known interpreters of that literature outside of the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union, by the way, saw you last season. You must have been one of the last Western artists, or American artists for sure, to appear there before the chill set in as the result of a number of international events. Did you present a lot of Russian songs on that Soviet tour?
Yes, I did the tour with Russian musicians. One, Dmitry Alexeyev, who has come several times as this country pianist to perform. Alexander Solodyanik, a very, very fine violinist who I'm sorry to say should have come this October to make her debut, Liana Itsikadze, a Georgian. And unfortunate, because she is really one of the best young violinists with Tretyakov and Spivakov. And she has not, for various reasons, till this time, come to this country to play. She plays often in Germany and in Scandinavia, but she has not come to America, and she was supposed to have made her debut this October. And so we did we did chamber music, and then with the pianist I did Rachmaninoff songs and Negro spirituals, and I think the people appreciate it. I've never had an audience with such attention and such appreciation as I had. So, yeah.
There's an enormous literature of songs by a variety of the most distinguished Russian composers, which is practically unknown outside of Russia because of the seemingly insurmountable language problem.
Yeah, the language. There's definitely a language problem for us as performers, of having to learn the language and sing in the language. I know that at the beginning I found the greatest difficulty, because I learned very visually, is that I couldn't see the words in my mind as I sang them. Also, when I was there, I was paid in rubles, of course, which you cannot bring out of the country and you can't exchange. So I think I cleaned out the local music shop, And I probably have one of the biggest collections of Russian music because I bought everything that was for soprano voice and things that were not for soprano voice. And I have really quite a lot, and I want to go through that music and discover some of the undiscovered things and do that because it's really some wonderful music. I could live 3 lifetimes without singing all the songs that I want to sing. Forget the operas and the orchestral works, but just the songs. I think it would take me 3 or 4 lifetimes just to do every song that I would want to sing.
Well, leaving the question of the songs aside, tell us what operatic roles in particular you are most anxious to do. Perhaps some that are already scheduled and some that are still in the realm of unfulfilled dreams.
Well, I will be doing Zerlina at the Paris Opera in May. And next year in Los Angeles, I will do Nanette with the Giulini and a recording. There has been talk of a film, but with Zeffirelli, but the last I hear, Zeffirelli sort of in and out. So I do hope that is possible. And then we do with the same cast in Covent Garden, the same piece. And I'm very excited about that because Giulini is one of those conductors that I really like very, very much. And this will be my first time working with him. And then to do a piece like this that I feel he's so close to, a piece like Falstaff, and that he knows so much about. I'm very excited to do that. And it also happens to be one of the singers that I like the most happens to be Mirella Freni. And she, 20 years ago, made her debut with the same piece with Giulini and Zeffirelli. And I just hope that that's a little piece of good luck, that coincidence.
Equally auspicious for you as for her.
Yes, because I like her very, very much. I think she's a fine artist.
Outside of opera and song, is there any other part of the repertoire that you haven't had the opportunity to explore to the extent that you'd like?
Well, I've touched on so much. I've done Baroque music and contemporary music and chamber music. I can't think of any part of it that I haven't touched. It's just that it's so much of it that I still have to discover and to learn learn through.
Do you find that you exclude pieces as you go on? You say that for all practical purposes you've retired final Alice from your repertoire. Do you find that you just simply feel that some pieces work better for you than other pieces and gradually begin to sort them out?
Well, but as I grow emotionally and vocally, then I have more possibilities. And so some of the pieces, when my possibilities were a little bit more limited, I retired them only because there is so much to do that in order to go on to something else, I have to let other things go. But, such as certain opera roles, which I have not done so much opera that I'm retiring my roles yet. But I think in 10 years there will be certain opera roles that I'm doing now that I probably won't do then as I go on to other things.
Well, we know for sure that in 10 years, regardless of what you will be singing or what you will have sung, that we will be hearing your name more and more often. And it's been our pleasure to talk to you during this intermission. Thank you very much, Barbara Hendricks.